So I think as a plan B, I'll ask the panel to introduce themselves. Farnes, if we can maybe start with you, work through Rob and Ray. Just everybody, just give a short introduction.
Thank you, Robbie, and good afternoon to everybody. Farnes van Wyk, I'm a co-founder of Greenco, currently the management executive of a Greenco. Also on the board of the Land Rehabilitation Society of Africa. I'm a mine rehabilitation and closure specialist.
Thanks, Robbie. My name's Rob Clutie. I'm Technical Director at Selectra, also Director of newly formed Greenco Bioenergy. I'm on the board of Sabia, and we're mainly focused on biogas, but we also offer a lot of other technical solutions.
Thanks, Robbie. Can you hear me? Nope. It takes a bit of time. Okay. I don't really know what I'm doing here. After that incredible presentation that we just heard about biogas and the opportunities that exist with biogas. But I represent a company called Clark Energy, which is the largest distributor of GE Jenbacher gas engines outside of GE itself. So I've undergone some form of a reinvention. I was a garbage man for many, many years, consulting in the field, and it kind of was natural that I moved into biogas, landfill gas, and all the other things that are associated with garbage. So if you forgive me, you're probably going to hear a fair amount of garbage from me.
Thank you, guys. I'd like to start this discussion by just going back a little bit to where I first started looking at bioenergy on mines. And it really started with a pre-feasibility study that we did back in around about 2008 for, at the time, a mine that belonged to Goldfields. And eventually we called it a triple top line project, referring to the triple bottom line that people normally talk about. You know, the triple bottom line is where you look at the people, the planet and profit. So you look at your social, your environmental and your financial aspects of a business. And we felt that this project was one where those three elements are designed in from the beginning, and therefore we didn't see it as a triple bottom line, but rather a triple top line project. The project was really about utilizing all forms of biomass available on the mine site to generate energy in a way that was sustainable and that could be sustained after the mine life, specifically with a view of a couple of problematic issues. The first was a lot of the mining impacted land was unsuitable for food production. The second was that there was a need to create post-mine life jobs. And the third was that there was a need to supply energy for pumping of the mine after the mine closure. So we felt that this project integrated all of that. So I'd like to start this discussion with the panel by just referring to that example and just to get everybody on the panel a chance just to talk about this potential application of technology in the energy space, but that cuts a little bit wider than just the energy supply itself. Farnes, I think you will probably start with the mine rehabilitation, and Ray will probably end up where we put the electrons into the wires.
Where to start? So the mine rehabilitation and closure space has drastically changed over the past 20 years since the inception of the NPRDA. So mines now basically have to provide for closure funds, trust funds, and that is set up one side for rehabilitation one day. So rehabilitation still have to be conducted from operational costs. Now, most decision makers also, what do I get back for this investment into environment? And mines now have to design for closure. They obviously have to look at all the different facets, what they're going to do with the contaminated water, contaminated land. And we also need to differentiate between different types of mines, metalloid mines and open cast mines. So along came bioenergy, and what a beautiful solution to leave a positive legacy. And all of a sudden, there's now a business case where the liability on the balance sheet may become an asset, and that can be retrofitted to actually fund your rehabilitation cost, and it's just very sweet for investors. So I think the rehabilitation space is going to quickly change, and let the environmental assets of a mining company sweat for that company, and all of a sudden there's energy on demand.
Yeah, Dwight, in his talk earlier, mentioned environmental return on investment, and exactly what Farnes is talking about now is, making that asset, or the environmental asset, which is currently a liability, sweat for the mine. So what we specialize in, and the reason why we partnered with the Greenco, is when they're done with rehabilitating the land and growing the energy crops, we will then take that energy and convert it to whatever the mine can best use. For instance, with Harmony, we looked at everything from gasification, biogas, combustion, the whole lot. And the sweet spot for them was in the energy range that they were talking about, which was 1 to 5 megawatts, was the biogas solution. Now, to tie in with end of mine and all that sort of thing, like Robbie was saying, we need to provide for the legacy costs that come after that. Now, the plan, well, in my mind, would be to actually transfer that asset to a community-based company, which would then continue to operate it and charge the mine or sell the energy on once the mine itself is closed. That can also provide a limited number of jobs. Depending on how you structure it, you can provide quite a few, but a limited number of jobs for people who would lose their jobs as a matter of course when the mine itself closes.
Just wait for this thing to come up, it fires up. That's an elegant solution, because bearing in mind the situation that South Africa faces with unemployment. We hear a lot about creating jobs, but we've lost jobs. We've bled jobs left, right, and center. We've actually got to do something about this. So when you find, even if it's a few jobs, as we say in Afrikaans, elke druppel maak die emmer vol. So you drop by drop, and small numbers of jobs that we create all over the place, so much the better. But there's more to it too than just the biogas. One of the byproducts of an anaerobic digestion operation is digestate, which comes out the other side. Now, it doesn't smell all that wonderful. It smells a bit like cow's manure, because people refer to anaerobic digesters as either concrete cows or metal cows, depending on how they're made. But that's a valuable byproduct, because that can go back towards helping to build the soil for the crops that they are going to plant there. I suppose you expected me to talk about engines in biogas. There's a role for engines in biogas. Yes, there is. But it's horses for courses. Depends entirely on the solution that will fit the needs of the mine concerned. And in any industry, it relates entirely to meeting their needs. So I'm not going to ever propound the idea that there's one size that fits all. The approach that I have is to adopt the golf club approach, that there's a whole series of golf clubs. You don't use a driver on a putting green, you use a putter. So whatever it is that you're doing, it must fit and meet the needs.
It's a biogas powered microphone. We need to give the system a chance to stabilize before we can start talking. One of the things I took out of this round of discussion is the sweating of the assets, and one of the issues that I found most interesting about the Harmony project was the utilization of existing infrastructure with respect to the leach tanks, with respect to what's on the impacted land. Do you guys think that there's a lot of opportunity to leverage off existing mining assets and thereby to mitigate what seems to be a very high cost of production of bioenergy?
To fire up again. I think most definitely that's a very valid point, but I've visited a number of mines, and there is a lot of plant and equipment standing around which is not being utilized. And in many cases they haven't even got around, because the things are still sitting on their asset registers, to cutting them up and selling them for scrap. And so what you're doing, again, as I said early on, is a very elegant solution to a problem that exists. There are other things too that are involved with mines, and I'm sure you know about this as well. And that is that quite a few of our mines are gassy mines. They produce quite a bit of methane, which in itself is quite dangerous. Now normally they can ventilate that methane, but in some cases we've had some spectacular explosions. Just the other day, I think about 2 or 3 months ago, we had a massive explosion down in the southeastern Free State associated with methane in a mine. That is an asset to the mine. That is something that can be extracted and can be used straight out, whether it's for, at the bottom of the mine, it's 99% methane. It can be used for fuel, it can be used to generate electricity, it can be used in a variety of different ways. And you've heard some of those things put forward so eloquently early on.
Yeah, Robbie, definitely you can leverage off the mine's existing assets. Take the Harmony example again. Those Pachuca tanks and cyanide storage tanks that are being converted were literally 2 days away from being demolished when we were looking for somewhere to site our plant. We jumped on the telephone and said, stop the bus. To build tanks like that's going to cost you quite a pretty penny. So certainly leveraging of that assets will save you in CapEx. And I think in terms of leveraging from the environmental perspective, be careful not to get onto your territory, Faunus. Rehabilitation money is, I would think the mines see it as money down the drain. Whereas if you use it to grow energy crops, you're actually getting a return on it.
Yep, so once again from the rehabilitation side, I mean, there's a lot of pipelines on mines. We can pump water through those pipelines. They do buy out a lot of land, called buffer zones around the mines. So those lands basically are lying there vacant. And obviously, the whole debate opens up about food production on those land, and whether you could either produce energy crops there or food crops. All of that land can work for you. I think perhaps a last comment, and that is in the big elephant in the room for the next year would be carbon tax. So that would most definitely, if you could leverage that correctly, that also could come down to your bottom line, but that's much more of Robbie's core speciality. It's just an added benefit. So all of a sudden, all of these start to add up. And on marginal mines, marginal operations, on certain times, all of these small little bits help. And obviously, adding to the SLP agenda, social labor planning agenda, obviously also a bit opportunity that you can fletch. Those funds need to be spent well. So from your balance sheet, all of a sudden, you can also sweat that opportunity.
Thank you. I've got a whole list of other questions that talks about water. It talks about post-mine life land use. It talks about technical risks, financing, and some other issues. But I do think it's important to give the audience also a chance to participate in the discussion. So if anybody wants to pick up any of these issues that I've just mentioned, feel free to do so. But if there's any other questions, I don't want this to be a one-sided discussion. I know we can not see you, you can see us. I just see the glare on my glasses. If anybody wants to ask some questions, I can't actually see you, but I'm sure Adrian can see if somebody puts up his hands. Questions. So let me move on and ask a question about water. It's often said that the electricity crisis is the one we know about, but the water crisis is the one we don't know about, and it can be bigger. Bioenergy production requires water. How do we address the issue of water in these projects, specifically with a reference to the fact that there is very often quite a lot of contaminated water on the mine as well? So how do you balance all of this?
Jeez. Yeah, so these days, you know, mines need water use licenses and they need to account for every single drop of those. Now, once again, there's a water balance and water is being paid for, so obviously you need the maximum bang for your buck that you can get from that water. So now it becomes once again a cost-benefit thing. So, you know, the water that you put through your system, that you might add some salts or sediment or that you're basically polluting, you know, you have to get some value from that and, you know, not to let it only evaporate. So obviously we can irrigate the crops with up until certain quality. You know, otherwise what I see definitely will happen is that we will basically treat that water and you know, that water will either become part of your energy factory or it will be sold off, because obviously, you know, once the mine leave, you know, the water balance that remains will go back to society, and society will need to survive from those water. So there's a nice back-to-back, you know, opportunity. Water needs to be pumped the whole time from shafts to de-water shafts. Someday that's going to stop, so something needs to happen with that water. And, you know, the whole bioenergy space opens up very nicely to do something with that water. But the water is going to remain contentious.
Robbie, may I add something to that? I don't know how many of you are aware of the Department of Water Affairs Green Drop program, which is a carrot and stick program. And it's mainly geared towards local authorities, but increasingly they're starting to look at applying it to organizations like mines. And it's a method whereby they measure improvement in terms of the water quality that's pushed out from wastewater treatment works. Now, every mine that I've been to so far has also had its own private wastewater treatment works, a sewage works, etc. And I would presume that you guys would probably be pulling that into your system anyway. And so it behoves mines to produce good quality water if they don't want to have the stick applied. And it's something to be aware of. A study that was done some time back, in fact 2 years ago, by the Water Research Council for the CSIR, very clearly showed the link between energy and water. The two almost tracked together. And so you need to be aware of this. We've been talking about energy, energy, energy. And Francis is so right to say, listen guys, don't forget about water. Because in fact, in many respects, that's also a serious constraint on the development of our economy.
Robbie, I don't have a hell of a lot to add after my two learned colleagues have had their opinions voiced. But you know, looking at it from the perspective of growing crops, you can always choose crops that don't need a lot of water. Depending on where you're mining, in the tropics, there's usually sufficient water to go dry land. If we look at Gauteng, we've got roughly 348,000 hectares of mine-impacted land. Sure, it's going to cost you a bit more, but you could also go dry land on that, avoiding the issue of water, essentially, in terms of irrigation of your crop. Of course, you've still got to treat what you've polluted as well. There are certain crops, take vetiver grass, for instance, has quite a high potential to pull out nutrients from water and treat it. Yeah, so there is that route as well.
Thanks. My next question is about finance. We've heard earlier today about people talking about taking the energy plant off the balance sheet of the mine and signing power purchase agreements, and this is where all the financiers get very excited, and all the lawyers, because they can make lots and lots of money on it. But what the bioenergy projects differ from something like a solar PV plant or a wind plant that supplies power. There's a bit of an overlap between the assets of the mine, assets and liabilities of the mine, and this project. The project can be implemented very often on land that belongs to the mine and where the mine's got a significant rehabilitation liability. There's the possibility to utilize mine assets in the project. So doesn't this graying of the boundaries between the energy company and the mine fundamentally make these things unfundable? Is it possible to separate it? Is it possible to come up with a solution where you can have a standalone energy company supplying energy at arm's length to the mine? Or do you need to take this project fully onto the balance sheet of the mine? And what has happened in the Harmony project that you've told us about?
Yeah, in terms of the Harmony project, it's totally owned by them. They chose to have it that way. But I would think it certainly is possible to have a standalone company supplying energy to the mines, utilizing the mines' assets in terms of land, water, and whatever infrastructure one's able to incorporate into that process. You would just have to do it in terms of you would have a PPA from the mine and also a long-term lease of sorts on whatever the assets are that you're utilizing.
Robbie, I think one of the important things is, it was mentioned yesterday and it was mentioned a number of times, is the question of collaboration. And in some cases we're talking about collaboration between government and mining institutions. But it may also mean collaboration between companies that are involved in producing energy and other companies that are involved in rehabilitation using biological means, phytoremediation, which is exactly what you're doing, where you actually can come together and form joint ventures, whatever the case might be, because again, we remember our friends, the financiers, and I don't know where they've all gone. I think they've all run away. So they're probably not here to listen to us. But it's one of those problems, is to make sure that the thing will float with the financial institutions, whether that is an independent funder like a commercial bank, or whether it is something that is more related to something like KfW. I've got some experience of working with KfW on a number of different projects. So it's, again, I can just say it's horses for courses. You need to get something together that is actually going to float. And that makes it extremely difficult. Because we come along with ideas, we're very enthusiastic about what we do, and unfortunately the chances of slipping on the proverbial banana peel are very good.
Yeah, not a lot to add there, except that from how I read the market, lots of soft funders, also guys like the DTI, they do want to see these projects going, the Technology Innovation Agency. So there are a bit of a government agenda to also, fast track these type of projects. And it's not necessarily aligned with the appetite of mines. In terms of the environmental return on investment, if you look at all the bigger scheme of things, energy savings, water optimization, discounting your closure liability, there simply has to be a business case. This project will pay for itself. And it's not that I can give you numbers off the top of my head, but in my view, it's a no-brainer.
Vanus and Rob, is it possible to utilize the financial provision for mine closure? Vanus, from your side, with respect to land rehabilitation, and Rob, maybe from your side, the demolition of those tanks at Harmony would have cost some money. And I assume that there would have been funds in the rehabilitation trust to cover the demolition and the rehabilitation of the site of that plant. If there's an alternative use for the plant, that demolition isn't needed, and can those funds be released and utilized in the project? or is it locked away in the DMR and nobody can touch it?
So, in order to get access to your trust funds, you need to write to the regional director of the DMR notifying that you intend to close the mine. And after proper due diligence, and we've got a lot of processes in South Africa regarding unions, and they will basically permit you that, yep, your mine is now closed. So then you will have access to the funds that you've basically contributed over life of mine. I do think there's now a proper case to go to government, to release some of those funds. So it's not possible just to have access to that funds. Firstly, but all of a sudden, now there is definitely a case to motivate that. Yeah.
I'm not a closure specialist, but I know that somehow Harmony have got it right to access some of the funds that were allocated to that infrastructure, both on the land side and on the tanks. But one would have to interrogate them as to how they got it right. I didn't have much to do with that process, but they certainly have been able to access some of the money, if not all of it, that was allocated to the assets that we're working with currently.
I'm not sure how much time we've got left, but the final question on the technology. Okay. Whenever you talk to financiers, you always hear that they will not take technology risk. Now, the bioenergy concept is a combination of well-proven technologies, all the way from agriculture through to anaerobic digesters through to things like gas engines or utilization of compressed biogas. It's, however, a unique combination of these technologies. And the question is really, it should have been asked to the funders, but for the panel now, do you think that the financiers will view the technology risk as substantial because it's a unique combination of different activities and technologies, or do you think that they would view the technology risk as low because every single aspect of the project is well proven?
Yeah, Robbie, I think that they don't have a negative outlook. To give an example to you, right now I know that there's something of the order of over 1,000 biogas to energy projects in Europe. I had the good fortune to meet an Austrian farmer who he calls himself a biogas farmer. And I visited him and he was using silage, maize silage, which kept another 8 farmers in business. He packed in farming and all he did was run a Jenbacher engine generating 500 kilowatts, because the Austrian law says if you generate 500 kilowatts or less than 500 kilowatts and you put it into the grid, you get a state subsidy. So he and his wife very kindly invited me out to dinner that evening, and I went along and they picked me up and they took me along to dinner, and they arrived in a Porsche Carrera. And I said, "Was ist das?" He says, "Das ist the biogas." So that would show you, we don't have any subsidies of that kind in South Africa, but it's a possibility to consider as well, because we could, given our grid infrastructure, and they're talking about upgrading grid infrastructure, we could in fact turn many of our agricultural operations into power generating operations, using precisely the technology that is being applied in terms of rehabilitating mines. So you can understand the field is absolutely wide open.
Yeah, Robbie, I think I agree with Ray in that the financiers don't have a negative outlook, but because there haven't been that many of these projects implemented in South Africa, it's more the international financiers who have experience of the particular technologies that we're combining, and that's probably where one would look first of all to get the finance for a project of this nature.
Yep, on my side, in terms of not only generating the biogas technology, but on getting the stuff to grow on impacted land, that takes quite some doing and some understanding. It is a recently developed science. There is a cap to which plants can respond, but then there's also the technology to optimize them. So in terms of yields, we need to maximize those yields. We need to understand which energy crops are the best, and luckily we do understand most of those energy crop species to date. But it will improve, and as it improves, you know, the financiers will queue to fund these projects. I'm more than certain of that.
Those are all my questions. Thank you, Adrian.
Perhaps I could just make a final statement from our side. I don't know how many of you have had the misfortune to drive through what was formerly the Mpumalanga, the Western Mpumalanga Highveld, the area where all the strip mining took place. It looks like the back end of the moon. And the type of technology that we're talking about here is the sort of technology that could be used to rehabilitate that area and restore it to some semblance of normality. That used to be part of South Africa's maize triangle, for anyone who might remember agriculture in South Africa as it was. And there's definitely a need for this. And that's mining too. But the problem there is we had our young fellow from Eskom this morning. They've never actually taken note of the actual cost of some of the things that they've left as a legacy for us as a country.
I'd just like to say a sincere thank you to Robbie, Fanis, Rob, and Ray. It's not easy to be the last panel, and you did an excellent job, so thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ruby.